Hello everyone and welcome back to another comic review. We've got another Indiegogo pick, the successfully funded Machi the Lazy Witch. So first impressions of Machi. Right away when you see the artwork, you see that it is very pleasing with tone and atmosphere. And a lot of that can be thanked for the coloring. The coloring in this comic is superb. The shading, the glowing, the atmosphere is all captured very, very well. You got the very big heads, tiny hands, tiny arms, very expressive eyes that go even beyond the face. Definitely an odd style choice, but it's definitely different. And I can always appreciate people trying out different styles to make their art unique. That being said, when it comes to drawing full bodies in this style, it comes off as a little bit too frumpy. It looks a little bit awkward, more like Cotton from King of the Hill than necessarily chibi. Starts you off with probably some of the best environmental drawings. You see these very cartoonish houses on these floating islands, and it just looks beautiful. And the story itself involves Machi and her sister going off to college, which is interesting considering that they're drawn in this very chibi, childlike style. And of course, this college is kind of like a Hogwarts thing. We all know how popular those types of shows are, so this is kind of one of those. There's a lot of visual details about the characters that I like a lot. I really like how when Machi puts her hair up, it looks like a pumpkin, because the rest of the atmosphere is definitely very Halloweenish and it fits very well. But everything else about the design of these characters is a little bit meh. Considering that these are the two main characters that we're going to be seeing the most of, you'd expect them to be wearing something a little bit more quirky. But Machi is in this very basic, just long sleeve t-shirt and sandals, while as her big sister is in these really weird mom clothes. And granted, when you put her big sister right next to Machi, it really looks like she's a side character. It really looks like the big sister is very bland, normal looking, like she's her mom. And I guess with the way that the story is, maybe that's done intentionally, because her big sister is more mother-like to her. And the storytelling itself is very awkwardly done. I love the coloring, the art style is unique and interesting, but the storytelling is lacking the most. And I don't even necessarily mean writing-wise, but also art-wise, visually-wise. A lot of these panels are very hyper-zoomed in all the time. Everything in the panels always seems to be very big, but it makes it much harder to get a real feel of environment. And I definitely make the same mistakes myself when I'm drawing out panels. I make everything too big because it's just easier to draw everything big. But you gotta, assuming you're drawing this digitally, you gotta take that line art that you've already done and you gotta shrink it and then draw more around of it. There are times and places for very big drawings, but in order to get a sense of where they are, it's not just about drawing really well done backgrounds, but also making the backgrounds bigger than the people, or at least making more medium shots. Like right here, you see her hair gets cut off by the panel. Don't do that. Just show her entire head, And you see up here, you can tell that this shot is not big enough either because she's getting her head cut off. That's no good. Maybe you should try to fix that. Maybe you should try to make the shot bigger so that you can actually fit them in the panel. And it constantly does feel like they're struggling to fit the character in the panel because they want to draw the character very big. Now this down here is a very perfect example of a time where you should make the shot very big. We're supposed to be focusing on this tree up here, but we can't see the entire tree. And the tree is later important because this is where they're going to make their home. And we see the tree when they've finally made their home, but we didn't see it before that. So maybe that panel above would have been a good opportunity to make this a big shot rather than a very, very zoomed in shot. Because visually, when we see that you're changing a tree to become a home, we want to see it before and after. We don't want to see a zoomed in tree and then after have it zoomed out. Visually, it just makes more sense. And then we have another basic art versus the story issue here. This was a joke that wasn't really captured very well, and I think it has a lot to do with the art that they chose for the panels. So basically, you know, her sister's behind her and she looks forward while she's talking, and when she turns around, her sister isn't there, her sister isn't listening. But it's not very exaggerated that she turned around to see that her sister wasn't there. In fact, it kind of looks like she just tilts her head ever so slightly to notice that her sister is not behind her. It almost looks like she's actually looking straight to the side rather than behind her. So maybe instead we should see it from the other side. See it from the other side, her fully turned around to see that her sister is not there. And that would show it more clearly that she turned around. And then this last panel just straight up confused me because it looks like they're in a small hallway of sorts, but she looks like she's still leaning on the box and her sister is coming back, but her sister was over here. Where are they? Where are they in this last panel? I don't know. Did she move? Did she move to a hallway? Is this supposed to be a hallway that she's in right now and her sister moved back to her? And it really shows the importance of having someone else read it and asking these types of questions, letting them be confused, so you know parts that might be confusing, parts that need to be established better in the art. Comics rely a lot on the art to tell you what's going on as the reader. If the art is struggling to do that job or struggling to show you exactly where the characters are and what they're exactly doing, then that's going to be an issue when it comes to reading it. And once again, that's another issue with making the characters big in every panel. It becomes a lot harder to see where they are in the room, and if they're walking, what they're doing exactly. You have so many shots that are just from the torso up. And there's not really that many dynamic shots either. It's mostly flat angles. I can tell that perspective might be an issue when it comes to the artist. There's definitely a lot of shots that look like the floor is too high. I'm sure that I think there's a better example in the second one. Yeah, this is a good example. So definitely the floor reaches way too high compared to where the characters are. Bring that floor down. You stretch out, the people on the side here, and you zoom in closer on the people who are supposed to be in the forefront. Gotta not be afraid to make them bigger, not be afraid to cover some things up. And seeing this reminds me of another issue, the lettering. Now, when you think of a gasp, do you think of it in this type of text? Lettering is very basic and sometimes really, really awkward when it comes to the word balloons. I don't really mind the text that they used for the word balloons, but it definitely is inconsistent in size, and that kind of makes it harder to read when you're looking at the full page. I feel like I need to zoom in to every individual panel to read it. Because when I look at the full page, I can read these last few panels at the bottom, but I kind of need to squint to see the upper panels because they're not a consistent size, so I'm not going to be looking at this consistently the same size. Even if I had the printed book version of it, I would need to put the book closer so that I could read the smaller panels and then put it back, put it closer, put it back, put it closer. And that's not really a fun way to read something. And of course, just a very basic problem of the words touching the edge of the word balloons. You don't want any of that. That's a no-no. Now, back to the story, the writing. It's a pretty simple story. They're going to Hogwarts, they're going to the Witch Academy. And it's basically a story of a girl who still, for the most part, feels like a kid, and now she's being pushed into the adult witch life, going to college with her much more capable older sister. And naturally, she's scared of slacking behind and not doing very well. Now, the way that the story is told is shockingly boring. You wouldn't think that a story about like a witch school would be that boring, but when you think about it, not that much actually happens in the first issue. They basically get off of a magical train, and then they make a house out of a tree, and then it ends. I think it's pretty basic when making comics. You need to have something really interesting happen with every single issue. At least one thing that sparks a reader's interest and makes them think, I want to read more of this. I have to read the next one to find out what happens next. This has to lead into something. There's nothing that really leads into anything for issue 2. Not really any teasing with what craziness will happen in issue 2. It's just get off the magical train, make your house. All right, time to move boxes in the house. Everything about the story feels like it's being made up on the spot rather than going off of an outline. And in that sense, it reminds me so much more of a webcomic than an official comic. And I think I've described my exact feelings towards webcomics enough times to you. Formatting of webcomics tends to be very, very big panels, very easily drawn characters, and very, very casual stories that are easy to share online. Now, I don't dislike casual stories. I don't dislike a story that's more laid back and not necessarily booming with something happening every 2 seconds. I enjoy a lot of slice of life stories. This is just a little bit too laid back. It's too comfortable with having absolutely nothing happen. And whenever something interesting does happen, it doesn't seem like it was thought all the way through yet. Like they're still trying to figure out what's going to happen over here. I think a good example of something that feels like it was written on the spot is this one character is offering snacks on the magical train. Now, one of the things I really like about diving into a more magical universe is how would a witch do a normal everyday thing? You know, how would magic translate into certain items or certain daily jobs? I think that's something that a lot of people like about the Harry Potter universe, is the fact that they really explore that a lot, especially with the different candy. You know, you have the every flavor jelly beans, and then you have the magical chocolate frog that'll just jump out and run away. I also kind of like to think of the mechanical aspects of something that's not real in our world. Like one of the things that, this is another just random name drop, but there's a movie called Red Line, and they have boosts for their cars that they drive, and rather than just pressing a button, they have these little clips that they put into this container and they latch it down, and you see it like fizz in this material. And you know, that's really interesting. That's a really interesting way of activating something. I don't think this is interesting. So you have these mirror like things around her palms that's going to make the snack, and then it like produces this hologram, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe that's a portal. She's going to just pull something out of the portal, but then she like shines this light on to the portal thing, and then it just shrinks, and then it pops into a soda. I understand it's magic. It's not supposed to necessarily make sense, but that was just not very visually pleasing. That just wasn't very interesting. I think I would have liked it a lot better if she just clasped her hands together, and as she pulled them apart, a soda just like came from the palm things. Maybe what you're imagining is cool about this just isn't translating onto pictures very well. Maybe if it was animated, it would be cooler. The idea behind it that you want to show a very cool and different way of doing something very normal, such as buying a soda pop, that's good idea, you know, but then the execution of it just didn't come off that way. The dialogue in the story is also a little bit meh, a little bit cringy here and there. I think the best scene out of these 2 issues that I've read actually comes in issue 2, where she sees an interesting familiar, and it's a rare familiar, very powerful, I can only assume, familiar, and she wants it. But you have to see if your magic is compatible with the familiar. So we actually have like an interesting system set up where she like makes her hair and all glowy and she puts it on this scanner, and she is not compatible with the familiar. So right here you have some interesting mechanic to magic that I actually found interesting, that I actually enjoyed a lot better than the soda pop thing. But also you have this character moment where once again she feels like she's falling behind, she's weak, that she's not going to do well at this college, and she's genuinely upset that she's too weak to have this familiar. It's a very good scene, and it also ties in very well with this ending scene where you see there's another magical familiar who was abandoned that she makes her own instead. So you see, you kind of have this foreshadowing with the other familiar not being compatible with her, but also you have it being a primary character moment. So all of that was very good stuff, and probably the most interesting part of this series so far. We're also introduced to side characters that will supposedly play a part in this story. They seem to kind of be pushed to the background. So the first 2 issues run extremely slowly. We haven't even gotten into the academy yet. We're not even seeing their classes. They're just prepping for the academy. So because of that, not a lot of interesting things are happening, and that's not gonna really sell your series. You gotta make sure that an interesting thing happens every single issue. You gotta make sure that you're hooking people on for the next issue every single time. What I personally like to do with my own comics is make every issue its own story. That being said, I think you have the right ideas here. I think you have a good main character, you have an interesting art style, and you got brilliant coloring. I like the cartooniness of it, but you really need to look into those story elements a lot closer, looking at these ideas, looking at the story, looking at the characters, and make sure that you know what you want to do and set aside goals for each issue that you accomplish. So, have you read Machi the Lazy Witch? And if you have, what do you think about it? Tell me down below in the comments section. As usual, remember to like this video. And if you're thinking, damn fan, I don't want to see chibi cartoony girls, I want to see the big titties. I got Orgasm Girl, it's live. Go back it right now. You get all the anime titties.
Program restart.